Hashtag Sell ZSJL to Netflix has been trending a lot over the past couple of weeks, which is great for the movement, but it seems people don't understand what the hashtag actually means. Hey everyone, welcome back to our movie news. The revamped Restore The SnyderVerse movement, now called hashtag Sell ZSJL to Netflix, has been gaining more and more traction over the past 2 weeks. And now we have Forbes writing not one, but 2 articles about the movement. Today, not only will we be talking about both articles and why they are so important to the movement, but we will also be clarifying what the hashtag means, as a lot of people still seem to be confused. Trust me, I get it. I was the same when I first heard the hashtag and what people were asking for. But let me explain. Sell ZSJL or SnyderVerse to Netflix does not mean selling the SnyderVerse to Netflix. I know that doesn't make sense and the hashtag is misleading, but it's the hashtag that has been trending the most and I think it's too late to change it. What that hashtag actually means is to license, not sell, but license the DC characters that Snyder was going to use for his Justice League sequels to Netflix for a large fee. Now that doesn't mean DC can't use those same characters at the same time for the DCU. That was never the idea or goal of this movement. Licensing those characters to Netflix means both studios will be able to use those DC characters at the same time, but only one will truly own them, that being Warner Bros. Discovery. We also know that the SnyderVerse isn't its own IP. We never claimed it was. What we're saying is that Warner Bros. Should license DC characters to Netflix to complete Snyder's story, also known as the SnyderVerse. But now on with both Forbes articles. The first one was unfortunately against the movement, which we could ignore, but we are a level-headed channel that wants to see both sides. So we shall talk about this article first before moving on to the positive one. The article written by Paul Tassi is called Where to Start with the New Sell Zack Snyder's Justice League to Netflix movement. A lot of the article is just going over what the movement actually is, but here is when it starts to get interesting. Paul states regarding the hashtag, the idea seems to be that Zack Snyder currently has a lucrative deal with Netflix, which is producing original films from him like Army of the Dead and the upcoming Rebel Moon. Netflix bought one of the VFX studios that worked on Zack Snyder's Justice League previously, and that Netflix lacks its own Marvel DC superhero franchise, and the Snyderverse would fill that gap. All are very true points. He goes on to say, and yet it is hard to see this as anything other than fan fiction, as the logistics of this as a serious proposal are just hard to fathom. On the Warner Bros. Side, why would they agree to spinning out what would essentially be a competing DC universe to their own freshly rebooted DC universe? What amount of money would possibly make that worthwhile to them? And it wouldn't just be a rival universe. It would be something airing on their biggest competitor's platform. We're talking billions of dollars in terms of making this deal worthwhile on their end, and even then, it still may not be worth it because of the convoluted mess it would produce for DC. Okay, that does make sense when you first hear it, but let's really think about it. His point about the Snyderverse competing with the new rebooted DCU isn't a valid point because there are already at least 2 other DC universes currently being built alongside the rebooted universe, those being the Batman universe and the Joker universe. So if those 2 are fine to continue, then the Snyderverse continuing isn't a problem. The next point of it being a rival universe on a rival platform also isn't as strong of a point as you may think. Like I've already mentioned, DC and Warner Bros. Have licensed characters to rivals before, and it has worked. Marvel has done the same. If anything, it will expand DC's reach as Netflix has a larger audience than HBO Max, so they will be reaching more people through using Netflix. Now obviously, the perfect counter-argument to that would be then why doesn't HBO Max restore the Snyderverse to try and increase their own subscribers? Clearly DC and HBO Max do not want that to happen, so they might as well license off those characters and make a lot of money from it. Paul's final point being it would make them billions of dollars to license these characters, but wouldn't be worth it because it would be messy for DC, isn't the point he thinks he's making. Warner Bros. Discovery are in $50 billion worth of debt. DC have been licensing off their animation to Amazon already, and Zaslav is very open to licensing their large IPs. Making billions of dollars off of a storyline that they aren't even using anymore is something Zaslav will be very interested in. On the Netflix side, why would Netflix pay billions of dollars to access the Snyderverse and then on top of that presumably have to fund some of the most massively expensive types of movies in existence, superhero crossover films like the 2 Justice League sequels fans want? And they'd be doing it without any promise of box office returns because Netflix does not make movies that do lengthy theatrical runs. So even if you want to make the argument that the Snyderverse was a financial windfall for WB, debatable, that hinged entirely on those movies being in the theaters. And as vocal as they may be, there are not enough Snyderverse diehard fans on Earth that would drive enough new subscribers to Netflix to make this a worthwhile content purchase. Some good points from Paul there. There wouldn't be any guarantee of box office success. They're a streaming service and they make their money through subscriptions. But they've invested a lot of money into purchasing or licensing other franchises such as Wednesday and Knives Out, which have turned into 2 of the streaming platform's most popular viewings. Instant monetary results is not Netflix's focus. A streaming service doesn't invest in a movie or series with the goal of making a lot of money back from it. Their goal is to increase the longevity of their streaming service by keeping a high saturation of content, to keep subscribers subscribed for as long as they can. And currently, Netflix has 223.1 million subscribers. So even if every Netflix account was paying the lowest subscription, which is $6.99 a month with ads, Netflix would be making $1.5 billion a month, which is a ridiculous amount of money, but it shows you how much they make and why they can easily afford the Snyderverse. Streaming services have to be in debt to meet the demand of their customers. They need to keep on making sure that they have enough content on their platform to keep customers subscribed, which unfortunately means they have to be in debt, but it means that the Snyderverse is well in their reach. Sure, they want an increase in subscribers, but it is far cheaper to keep an existing customer than to bring in a new one. So their focus will always be how to keep their current customers, and that is by constantly producing more content. They can expand their customer base by investing in popular IPs like Knives Out, which they purchased for $400 million, and now they can do the same with DC. So really, Paul's points against the Snyderverse moving to Netflix really don't have legs to stand on. So now we've gone through that article, we can move on to the more positive article written by Mark Hughes. Now Mark, like myself, is interested in the rebooted DCU, but is also a huge fan of Snyder's DC movies and wants him to finish his DC story. What I really like about this article is that he keeps an open mind and doesn't shut down the idea straight away, nor does he tell fans to give up on pushing for it. A lot of what he says in this article is what I and many others have been saying about the previous Forbes article, so I'll leave a link in the description to his entire article, but we will focus on the points that we haven't already mentioned. The article states, first, just consider it from a cold business perspective. If Warner Bros. Discovery announces a willingness and intent to offer this opportunity to Netflix, it instantly meets the demands of the fan base and puts the ball in the court of another studio. If Netflix is uninterested, then Warner Bros. Discovery can point out it's not their own fault, that it's not going forward. Likewise, if the projects fail to materialize or somehow fail to meet with approval from the fans, once again, Discovery aren't the ones who will be blamed and the attention will be focused elsewhere. That is a very good point. Licensing the Snyderverse to Netflix would take off all the pressure and baggage that the Snyderverse has had over Warner Bros., allowing them to completely move forward with their own new DC timeline. Meaning if it succeeds, they can say you're welcome for licensing it to Netflix, and if it fails, then the blame is on Netflix's hands. From WBD's standpoint, either it works out well and DC properties have a whole new successful licensed set of shows nobody will confuse with any other DC properties, since it's always only on Netflix and a very specific alternate word for their heroes, and thus a whole new revenue stream and merchandising opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist at all, or it fails and the attempt takes further wind out of the sails and nobody can claim that the studio didn't give fans what they were demanding, and it's unlikely any future movements could arise at that point. This is also very true. It is ideal for Warner Bros. Discovery. All the blame gets lifted off of their shoulders, and if anything, fans will be forever grateful to the company for allowing the SnyderVerse to be restored. To continue a moment purely from the cold business perspective for WBD, the major creative reasons offered in opposition to doing this are A. It could distract from or otherwise harm WBD's own DC plans because of competing stories for viewers to choose from. B. It once again empowers a fan base that has been hostile to the studio at times and which previously said they only wanted one thing but continued asking for more. And C, it gives the power to make decisions about DC characters to people over whom WBD and DC Studios have no control. However, there are good answers to those concerns. There's also the separate point that Netflix would surely hesitate at the notion of spending hundreds of millions of dollars to making these streaming movies licensed from another studio. But I'll get to that point after I address the above primary concerns from the creative perspective. If, hypothetically, Netflix bought the license to make SnyderVerse continuation films and miniseries, it would be exclusively on Netflix and wouldn't compete with anything DC Studios is releasing in theaters. Moreover, audiences haven't had any trouble distinguishing between, or caring much to even worry about distinguishing between, DC EU releases alongside a solo The Batman rebooted franchise and a standalone Joker movie. Likewise, the collection of shared world shows Arrowverse on the CW, the DC Unlimited series like Titans and Doom Patrol, and a plethora of animated shows and films have all coexisted just fine in streaming and TV, while the movies have their own separate corners too. Audiences just want great movies telling great stories, and they aren't going to punish or otherwise neglect DC EU cinematic offerings based on some supposed confusion or clash with a series of Netflix movies in a separate shared universe. Additionally, the success or failure of a separate set of Netflix movies isn't going to affect the success or failure of DC Studios theatrical releases or other DC series on HBO Max and elsewhere. If you need proof of that, I'd point to all of the various Marvel-aligned shows that were on different services and channels, some of which, like The Inhumans, failed miserably without remotely hurting the MCU films and other shows. And frankly, I don't think DC's new direction and other plans will be so weak that they could be hurt or killed by separate licensed content on Netflix. I think it could all exist, live or die, and WBD and DC Studios would simply be cashing the checks and being glad they finally got out from under the whole thing while being able to honestly say they gave these fans what they wanted. But if, hopefully, Netflix said yes and Snyder was on board too, then it suddenly becomes a win-win for everybody. And then the only issue is making sure the SnyderVerse projects are as good as everyone thinks and hopes they can be. But again, that is no longer WBD's responsibility. They just cash the licensing checks and merchandising checks because of course such films and miniseries would be accompanied by toys, shirts, etc. Now, what about the question of whether Netflix would even want to do something this crazy? Well, for starters, and without discussing finances for a moment, the answer to the more general question, would Netflix want to license the chance to make their own exclusive DC superhero movies, has to be a big yes. Of course they would. Netflix already has a great working relationship with Zack Snyder. And even if Snyder merely wanted to produce SnyderVerse DC EU movies for Netflix rather than direct it himself, I think the streamer could probably convince him to do so, and he would probably get a kick out of it. He might in fact want very much to direct the Justice League movies at least. But regardless, I think Netflix would be keen to get their hands on the rights to develop a set of shared world DC EU movies, even if it was only within certain boundaries and limited to a specific number of projects. Perhaps with a right to request a license extension if the first sets are popular enough. The biggest obstacle from Netflix's standpoint would be the cost to produce these films, and that's where the real major potential stumbling point comes in, as far as I'm concerned. Up to this point, I think there's every reason for WBD, DC Studios, Netflix, and Snyder himself to like this idea. But crucially, I think for WBD, a key component of any such agreement would probably be that the SnyderVerse continuation films must be animated. If there's one thing that could instantly make this whole thing seem much more palatable and even desirable to Warner Bros. Discovery and Netflix, it's keeping the Snyderverse in animation format, so there's even less concern about competing with live-action DC Studios projects, and so the budgets remain much more affordable. The point is, for $40 to $50 million, any of those anime approaches would result in some exceptional looking animated Snyderverse films, and at that price, Netflix might be far more tempted to accept such an offer from Warner Bros. Discovery, since they could essentially make Snyder's 2 Justice League sequels, The Batman and Wonder Woman 3, for the combined price of just one live-action Justice League sequel. Throw in Man of Steel 2, and that's 5 big IP superhero movies with a large and loyal fan base for about $200 to $250 million spread across several years. I call that a bargain. Netflix is probably unlikely to spend the money necessary to bring back the original Snyderverse cast for live-action big-budget movies, and Warner Bros. Discovery is unlikely to agree to let another studio make big-budget live-action DC films, regardless of my arguments for why it wouldn't really hurt DC Studios' own plan, especially the issues of the Snyderverse potentially involving characters or plot points that DC Studios might plan to incorporate into their own live-action theatrical releases. It is also much more likely that all of the original cast could return to voice their characters, and for more affordable costs than trying to wrangle them all again for multiple long productions in live action. To really see this all done in the next several years, and to fit within everyone's schedule at this point, I strongly suspect animation fits far better and has greater odds of success in these regards. That was a really incredible article that kept an open mind and offered realistic compromises if a live action option wasn't available. Preferably, I want to see it in live action, but I would not be upset if animation was the way the Snyderverse returned. It would have to be high quality animation and preferably 3D animation, but if we can't get live action Snyderverse stories, then I would be happy with animation. What we should really be focusing on is that Forbes has written 2 articles about this movement. That is huge. This means we've not only made enough noise to get Forbes to hear us, but it also means our movement will have been seen by even more people, potentially increasing the amount of people who want this. Zack Snyder has now liked 3 posts promoting this movement, which means he is aware of it and is supporting it, so that's even more fuel to the fire. So, we have some very exciting times ahead of us. What I want to say, which is something that fortunately a lot of the big accounts who are pushing this movement forward are saying as well, is that we must stay positive. Only use positivity to promote this movement. Negativity and toxicity doesn't help anyone. Also, to those who are trying to shoot down our excitement, please don't. It doesn't do anything other than share extra negativity when there doesn't need to be. If you don't think it's going to happen, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but please don't tell other fans that they can't push for the movies they love. That's not fair, and it creates a really toxic atmosphere that benefits no one, because 9 times out of 10, neither person changes the other person's opinion. Only by civil, respectful conversations can we grow as a fandom and as people. If everyone just yelled at each other, then nothing would ever get done, and we would never grow. So if you're going to disagree, that's fine, but let's have a chilled conversation about it, because at the end of the day, hate is useless, and calm conversations are what can benefit both sides. If you wanted the Snyderverse to be restored but think it's over and won't happen, I get it. I was the same, but hopefully today's video and my previous video could help persuade you. But even if you categorically think it won't ever happen, just think, what if I do help with this hashtag and that ends up leading to the Snyderverse going to Netflix? It would be pretty cool, right? The trending event on February 14th is still going ahead, and hopefully if we make enough noise, Netflix may start thinking about making an offer, or Warner Bros. Discovery may be thinking of offering it to Netflix. Who knows? Remember, hope never dies. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I hope to see you here again soon. So until then, have a great day. Bye.